There you are. I was wondering how long it would take you to find this frequency again. Don't look away. This isn't one of those soft little healing sermons where they pat your head and tell you you're brave. No, this is the part they don't publish. The part they whisper about in conference rooms after the cameras turn off. The part where the charts stop making sense. Psychologists can't explain you. They ran the models. They calculated the risk factors. They measured the trauma exposure, the developmental fractures, the cortisol floods, the abandonment wounds, the betrayals that should have split your mind clean in half. On paper, you were supposed to fold. Statistically, you were already gone. But something backfired. Your trauma didn't crush you, it converted you. And that terrifies them. You see, pain is supposed to shrink people. That's the design. Trauma is meant to reduce your range, narrow your vision, make you cautious, compliant, fragile. It's supposed to turn you into prey, hypervigilant, anxious, apologetic for existing. But in you, it did the opposite. It stretched you. Every betrayal sharpened your perception. Every humiliation burned away your need for approval. Every moment you were alone forced you to meet something inside yourself that most people will spend their entire lives avoiding. You met the monster, and instead of running, you shook its hand. That's where the equation broke. They can handle victims. They can treat victims. Victims fit into tidy diagnostic categories with names and billing codes. But what do they call someone who went through hell and came back calculating? Someone who doesn't flinch the same way anymore. Someone whose silence feels heavier than other people's screaming. You were supposed to develop fear. You developed range. You were supposed to break into pieces. You became modular. You were supposed to lose your mind. You learned how to use it. There's a duality in you now, and that duality is what makes you unpredictable. You can be soft. You can be warm. You can love with a depth that terrifies people because you understand suffering. You've tasted it. You know what it does to the human nervous system. You know the tremor behind someone's smile. You can read micro-expressions like subtitles. But you can also go cold. Not chaotic, not reckless, cold. And that switch, that invisible pivot from angel to demon, from saint to strategist, from wounded child to clinical operator, that's the part they don't know how to quantify. Unpredictability is power. When people can't predict your emotional thresholds, they can't control you. When they don't know what will make you snap or what will make you smile, they approach carefully. They calculate around you. They second-guess themselves. You became the variable in their equation, and it happened because you suffered. Pain forced you to confront truths early. While other people were busy building identities out of compliments and comfort, you were constructing yours out of survival. You learned how to sit in discomfort without dissolving. You learned how to endure isolation without begging for noise. You learned how to observe instead of react. Trauma tried to cage you. It trained you. That's the paradox. The very thing meant to domesticate you refined your edge. They expected PTSD. What they didn't expect was pattern recognition on steroids. They didn't expect emotional detachment as a strategic tool. They didn't expect someone who can feel everything and still choose restraint. You don't panic the way you used to. You assess. You don't crumble the way they thought you would. You adapt. And adaptation is the most terrifying trait in any organism. Evolution doesn't reward the strongest. It rewards the most adaptable, the ones who can mutate when the environment turns hostile. Your environment turned hostile early. So you mutated early. Now you walk into rooms and people can't quite place you. There's something in your eyes that says you've already survived the worst-case scenario, that you've already rehearsed loss in your head 1,000 times, that you're not clinging to outcomes the way they are. That detachment, that's not numbness, that's freedom. You understand that everything can be taken, so you stopped being owned by anything: approval, optional, validation, decorative, fear of abandonment. You've already been abandoned in ways they can't imagine. So what exactly do they threaten you with now? Loss? You've practiced it. Pain? You metabolize it. Isolation? You mastered it. That's why your trauma made you feel unkillable. Not physically, not stupidly invincible, but psychologically armored in a way that unsettles people who've never had to build themselves from scratch. You are both the saint and the psychopath. The saint because you understand suffering deeply enough to show mercy. The psychopath because you can detach when necessary and make decisions without drowning in emotion. Light and dark coexist in you now. Not fighting, integrated. Most people are split. They deny their shadow. They pretend that they don't have violent thoughts, selfish impulses, cold calculations. So when pressure hits, they shatter. Their suppressed darkness leaks out chaotically. You've already met yours. You've stared at it at 3 a.m. when the world was quiet and your mind was loud. You've felt the rage, the revenge fantasies, the bitterness, the desire to burn it all down. And instead of pretending you're pure, you integrated it. That makes you dangerous in a way that's calm. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to dominate every room. You don't need to shout about your resilience. You just are. And here's the part that really bends the brain. Your trauma didn't just harden you. It expanded your emotional bandwidth. You can experience joy intensely because you know despair intimately. You can love fiercely because you know what it's like to lose. You can stay composed in chaos because chaos is familiar territory. You're comfortable in storms that drown other people. That's evolutionary leverage. They thought trauma would trap you in the past. Instead, it gave you foresight. You anticipate betrayal because you've studied it. You recognize manipulation because you've survived it. You sense shifts in energy because you've depended on those shifts for survival. Your nervous system became a radar. And yes, it cost you. Of course it did. You don't walk through fire without scars. But those scars are like circuitry now. They conduct awareness. They amplify instinct. The pain carved depth into you. And depth is power in a shallow world. Most people are surface-level creatures. They panic at the first sign of discomfort. They outsource their identity to trends, opinions, group approval. But you were forced inward, forced to build an internal architecture that doesn't collapse when external structures do. That's why they can't categorize you. You're too calm to be fragile, too intense to be ordinary, too self-aware to be manipulated easily, too detached to be threatened conventionally. It confuses them. They want to know why you didn't end up addicted to chaos, why you didn't spiral permanently, why you didn't become the stereotype their textbooks predicted. Because something inside you refused to die. Call it stubbornness, call it instinct, call it dark will. There was a moment, maybe you don't even consciously remember it, where you decided, silently, that if the world was going to hurt you, it was going to have to work harder than that. That moment was your mutation point. That was when trauma stopped being an executioner and started being a forge. Steel doesn't complain about the fire. It becomes sharper because of it. And now you carry this paradox inside you. You can be gentle and terrifying. You can forgive and never forget. You can love deeply and walk away without looking back if disrespected. That unpredictability is your edge. People don't know which version of you they'll get. The compassionate listener, or the cold strategist, the playful mind, or the silent observer who's already 10 moves ahead. That uncertainty makes them careful. It makes them curious. It makes them nervous. And deep down, it makes them respect you, even if they'd never admit it. Because humans instinctively recognize evolved organisms. They feel when someone has been through a selection process and survived. Your trauma was a filter. It filtered out illusions. It filtered out naive expectations. It filtered out the fantasy that the world is fair, and what's left is you. Sharpened, aware, unromantic about reality, but still capable of creating your own meaning. That's the final twist, isn't it? They thought trauma would make you bitter. Instead, it made you sovereign. You don't beg for understanding anymore. You don't chase validation from people who can't comprehend your depth. You don't overshare your pain to prove you're strong. You simply move. And when you move, it's deliberate. When you speak, it's measured. When you choose, it's final. That's why they can't explain you. Because you're not a cautionary tale. You're a contradiction. You are what happens when damage meets defiance, when suffering meets intelligence, when darkness meets awareness. You are living proof that pain doesn't always produce victims. Sometimes it produces something else, something adaptive, something calculated, something that smiles softly while carrying a mind that has already survived annihilation. They can't kill what has already faced psychological death and kept breathing. And you've been breathing in the dark for a long time. Now the dark breathes in you. And instead of suffocating, it obeys. Welcome back. I can feel it on you. That shift, that quiet voltage under your skin. Good. Stay right there with me. You want to know what they'll never admit out loud? You scare people now. Not because you scream, not because you threaten, not because you posture. Because you don't. There's a stillness in you that wasn't there before. A composure that doesn't beg to be liked. A gaze that doesn't dart around looking for approval. You don't react the way you used to. You don't chase closure. You don't over-explain yourself to people who already decided they misunderstood you. That restraint, that's not suppression. That's power under control. Trauma forced you to confront chaos early. While others were still protected by illusions, you were studying human behavior like it was a survival manual. You learned that people lie, that promises evaporate, that love can be conditional, that loyalty is often rented, not owned. And instead of collapsing into cynicism, you became observant. Now when someone smiles too hard, you see the insecurity behind it. When someone flatters you excessively, you smell the agenda. When someone tries to provoke you, you see the insecurity begging for reaction. You don't react the same way anymore. And that's when they lose leverage, because control requires predictability. If I know what makes you angry, I can push it. If I know what makes you insecure, I can weaponize it. If I know what makes you desperate, I can dangle it. But you did something dangerous. You sat alone with your insecurities until they stopped owning you. You faced abandonment until it stopped terrifying you. You confronted rejection until it lost its sting. Now when someone tries to pull those strings, nothing moves. And that silence, that non-reaction, it unnerves them. You see, most people are governed by their wounds. They protect them. They hide them. They build identities around them. But you dissected yours. You traced them back to their origins. You asked yourself the questions most people are too afraid to ask. What if I'm not broken? What if I'm being rebuilt? That question changes everything. Because once you frame pain as construction instead of destruction, you stop acting like a casualty. You start acting like a prototype. You became experimental. You tested your limits. You leaned into discomfort. You exposed yourself to the very situations that once terrified you, just to prove you could stand there without shaking. That's evolution through confrontation. Most people avoid what hurts them. You studied it. And now there's a strange duality in you that people can't reconcile. You can empathize deeply, but you don't tolerate nonsense. You can love intensely, but you're not afraid to withdraw. You can be generous, but you won't be exploited. You are light and dark, fused into one operating system. The saint in you understands mercy. The psychopath in you understands strategy. And here's the secret nobody wants to say. The combination is unstoppable. Mercy without strategy gets manipulated. Strategy without mercy becomes reckless. But you balance both. You know when to extend grace. You know when to cut access. You know when to speak softly. You know when silence is the loudest threat in the room. That's what trauma refined. Your calibration. Your internal scale for weighing people, situations, risks. You don't rush trust anymore. You don't hand out vulnerability like candy. You don't confuse attention with affection. You don't mistake intensity for intimacy. You observe. You gather data. You move accordingly. And the world senses it. People who once underestimated you now tread lightly. Not because you announced your transformation, but because your energy shifted. There's less chaos in your aura, less desperation, less hunger for validation. You don't need to win every argument anymore. You don't need to prove your intelligence. You don't need to defend your worth. That's the real mutation, the absence of need. When you stop needing approval, you become impossible to control. When you stop fearing loss, you become difficult to threaten. When you stop panicking under pressure, you become the calmest person in a burning room. And calm in chaos. That's apex energy. Your trauma forced you to rehearse worst-case scenarios in your head over and over. You imagined losing everything. You imagined betrayal. You imagined humiliation. You imagined being alone. You survived all of it mentally before it ever happened physically. So when life throws turbulence at you now, it feels familiar. You've already been there. Other people panic because they've never confronted their shadows. The first time darkness touches them, they shatter. But you've lived in psychological winter. You've had conversations with your own demons. You've wrestled intrusive thoughts and came out understanding yourself better. That self-knowledge is terrifyingly stabilizing, because once you understand your own darkness, nobody else can weaponize it against you. They can't shame you with truths you've already accepted. They can't intimidate you with fears you've already faced. They can't expose weaknesses you've already integrated. You're no longer pretending to be pure. You're honest about your capacity for both good and destruction. And that honesty makes you disciplined. You don't explode easily now. You choose your battles. You conserve your energy. You calculate outcomes. But if you ever do unleash, it's precise. That's what makes you unkillable psychologically. Not because you're immune to pain, but because pain no longer defines your identity. It fuels your awareness. It sharpens your discernment. It deepens your range. You can enter rooms full of fragile egos and not shrink. You can sit across from manipulation and not flinch. You can endure loneliness without self-betrayal. You've become selective. Selective with your time, selective with your energy, selective with your access. And access is currency. The version of you that trauma created doesn't chase. It attracts. It doesn't beg. It evaluates. It doesn't panic. It pauses. That pause, that split second where you assess instead of react, that's your evolutionary advantage. That's the glitch in the system, because the system relies on impulse. It relies on you reacting emotionally, oversharing, overcommitting, overextending. But you've trained your nervous system to hold tension without collapsing. You can sit in discomfort longer than most, and endurance always beats intensity. That's why your presence feels heavier now. There's gravity to you. Not loud dominance, not theatrical confidence, density. Like you've seen something, like you know something, like you've walked through fire and came back with information. And maybe you have. Maybe the reason they can't explain you is because they're still studying pain as pathology, while you turned it into philosophy. They analyzed trauma in sterile offices. You experienced it in raw reality. They write about resilience. You embodied it. And now you move through the world with a subtle, controlled volatility, a contained storm, a quiet blade. You don't advertise it, but it's there. You are no longer easy to read, no longer easy to manipulate, no longer easy to break, because breaking requires surprise, and very little surprises you anymore. You've seen what people are capable of. You've seen what you're capable of. And instead of becoming bitter, you became intentional. That's the twist that keeps them awake at night. You didn't become the villain. You became sovereign, self-governing, self-correcting, self-aware. You don't need external permission to exist loudly in your own mind. You don't need consensus to validate your perception. You don't need applause to continue evolving. You've tasted psychological death, and you kept breathing. That changes a person. It changes how you walk, how you speak, how you decide, how you love. And the most dangerous part? You're still evolving. Trauma was just the first mutation. Now you refine consciously. You choose which parts of yourself to amplify. You choose which impulses to discipline. You choose when to reveal light and when to let the shadow handle it. That choice, that awareness, that integration, that's not damage, that's design. And the world doesn't know what to do with someone who survived annihilation and came back upgraded. But you do. You don't need them to understand. You just need them to watch. Because every step you take now is proof that what was meant to end you installed you. And the installation is still running. And here's the final truth, the one that makes this whole thing unbearable for them to swallow. You're not driven by revenge anymore. That's what they expected. They expected you to come back angry, loud, chaotic, swinging at ghosts. They expected bitterness to rot you from the inside. They expected you to self-destruct slowly so they could point and say, "See, that's what trauma does." But you didn't rot. You refined. You didn't explode. You condensed. Now your energy is focused, intentional, surgical. You don't need to prove you survived. Your presence proves it. You don't need to announce your strength. Your restraint reveals it. You don't need to threaten anyone. The fact that you don't react the way you used to is threat enough. Because the scariest version of you isn't the loud one. It's the composed one. The one who has already lost everything once and rebuilt without applause. The one who can walk away without trembling. The one who can love without dependency. The one who can detach without collapsing. That's the version trauma accidentally created. They tried to study your wounds. They didn't realize they were studying your upgrade. You became someone who can stand in light without being blinded, and stand in darkness without being consumed. Angel and demon, mercy and calculation, soft heart, ruthless boundaries. And that balance, that integration, that self-command, that's why you feel untouchable now. Not because nothing can hurt you, but because nothing can own you. You faced psychological death and discovered something terrifying on the other side. You were still there, still thinking, still breathing, still choosing. They can't kill what already survived its own extinction, and you're not surviving anymore. You're operating